Hey guys, tonight we're exploring the disturbing. Things that were completely normal in Regency England. A world filled with strange customs, harsh punishments, and everyday realities that would shock most people today. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel, get comfortable, and let's quietly step back into the early 19th century. Regency England is often remembered as an age of elegant balls, grand meubles, and romantic stories. Many people imagine candlelit dancers, wealthy gentlemen, and beautiful ladies strolling through carefully maintained gardens. Yet behind this polished image existed a very different reality. Life for ordinary people could be harsh, uncomfortable, and sometimes frightening. Many customs that society accepted without question would be considered cruel or disturbing today. One of the most shocking aspects of Regency life was public punishment. Executions were not hidden from society. Instead, they were often treated as public events. Large crowds gathered to watch criminals being hanged. Vendors sold food and drinks while families attended as if they were visiting a fair. Children sometimes witnessed these scenes alongside adults. To modern eyes, the idea of turning an execution into entertainment seems unimaginable, but many people at the time considered it completely normal. Medical treatment was equally unsettling. Doctors possessed far less knowledge than modern physicians. Operations were performed without effective anesthesia, meaning patients remained awake through agonizing procedures. Infections were common, and many treatments caused more suffering than relief. Bloodletting remained a popular practice because people believed removing blood could cure illness. Even wealthy families often placed their trust in methods that today would be considered dangerous. Hygiene standards also differed greatly from modern expectations. Although people valued cleanliness, regular bathing was less common than many imagine. Cities struggled with waste disposal. Unpleasant odours filled crowded streets, and diseases spread easily through contaminated water. Wealthy neighbourhoods appeared elegant on the surface, but even they faced sanitation problems that would be unacceptable today. Social class shaped nearly every aspect of life. A person's opportunities, education, and future often depended on the family into which they were born. While aristocrats enjoyed luxury and influence, many labourers worked long hours simply to survive. Poverty was visible throughout towns and cities. Yet extreme inequality was accepted as a natural part of society. Few questioned whether such differences were fair. For countless ordinary families, daily life was a constant struggle against hunger, illness, and uncertainty. Children experienced a particularly difficult life during the Regency era. Many began working at ages that would seem shocking today. Young boys and girls could be found in factories, workshops, farms, and households performing demanding tasks for long hours. Education was a luxury that many poor families could not afford. Instead of attending school, children were expected to contribute to the family's income as soon as they were physically capable. Accidents were common, especially in workplaces filled with dangerous machinery. Yet society largely viewed this as a normal part of growing up. The legal system could also appear incredibly harsh. Crimes that might receive relatively light punishment today sometimes resulted in severe penalties. Theft was treated particularly seriously, and even small offences could lead to imprisonment, transportation to distant colonies, or execution. Authorities believed strict punishment would discourage criminal behaviour. Fear played a major role in maintaining order, and compassion was often considered less important than deterrence. Marriage was another area governed by rigid social expectations. Love certainly existed, but practical concerns frequently influenced relationships. Family, reputation, financial security, and social standing often mattered as much as personal affection. Women possessed limited rights compared to men. After marriage, a woman's legal and financial independence could become heavily restricted. Society expected her to follow strict rules regarding behaviour, appearance, and public conduct. Failure to meet these expectations could damage her reputation for years. Daily transportation carried risks as well. Roads were often muddy, uneven, and poorly maintained. Long-distance travel took considerable time and exposed travellers to accidents, bad weather, and even highway robbers in certain regions. A journey that today might require only a few hours could consume several days. Despite these hardships, people adapted because they knew no alternative. Perhaps one of the strangest realities was how familiar death remained in everyday life. Disease, childbirth complications, workplace accidents, and infections claimed countless lives. Families frequently lost relatives at young ages. Mourning was a common part of existence, and most people expected to experience significant personal loss throughout their lives. What appears tragic and shocking to modern observers was often accepted as an unavoidable fact of life. Beneath the elegant clothing and grand architecture of Regency England existed a world where hardship, inequality, and danger were woven into daily routines so deeply that many people hardly questioned them at all. Food and dining habits could be surprisingly unpleasant as well. Wealthy families enjoyed impressive banquets, but preserving food remained a constant challenge. Without refrigeration, meat, dairy products, and other perishables spoiled quickly. Cooks relied on salting, smoking, and other preservation methods. Yet food poisoning still occurred. Ordinary families often survived on simple diets that lacked variety, especially during difficult economic periods. Poor harvests could cause prices to rise dramatically, pushing struggling households closer to starvation. Another disturbing reality involved mental health. People suffering from psychological illnesses rarely received the understanding or treatment available today. Many conditions were poorly understood and surrounded by fear or superstition. Some individuals were confined to institutions where living conditions could be harsh and treatment methods questionable. Rather than receiving compassion, many patients became objects of curiosity or ridicule. Society possessed few effective ways to help them. Animal welfare was also viewed very differently. Activities involving animal suffering were common forms of entertainment. Crowds gathered to watch brutal spectacles that modern audiences would likely find horrifying, while some individuals argued for greater compassion toward animals. Such views were still relatively uncommon. For many people, these events were simply another part of public life. Fire represented another constant danger. Most homes relied on candles, fireplaces, and oil lamps for light and heat. A single accident could destroy entire buildings or neighbourhoods. Cities contained tightly packed structures made from highly flammable materials. making large fires a persistent threat. Families often lived with the knowledge that disaster could strike unexpectedly at any moment. Disease outbreaks added another layer of uncertainty. Smallpox, tuberculosis, typhus, and numerous other illnesses spread through communities with frightening speed. Vaccination against smallpox was beginning to develop, but medical knowledge remained limited. Many families watched helplessly as relatives became ill, uncertain whether they would recover. The fear of sickness lingered in the background of daily life, influencing decisions about travel, work, and social gatherings. Even entertainment reflected the harsher nature of the era. Prize fighting, public punishments, and sensational stories attracted large audiences. People sought distraction from difficult lives, and society often accepted forms of entertainment that modern viewers would consider disturbing. Looking beyond the elegant portraits and romantic novels, Regency England reveals itself as a complicated world. Beauty and hardship existed side by side. Grand ballrooms stood not far from crowded slums. Lavish dinners occurred while others struggled to find enough food. The contrast between wealth and poverty shaped nearly every aspect of life, creating a society that could appear both fascinating and deeply unsettling at the same time. Housing conditions revealed another side of Regency England that many modern people would find difficult to imagine. While aristocrats lived in impressive country estates and elegant townhouses, a large portion of the population occupied cramped and uncomfortable homes. Entire families often shared only a few small rooms. Privacy was rare, and overcrowding increased the spread of disease. During cold winters, many households struggled to keep warm, while damp walls and poor ventilation created unhealthy living environments. Yet these conditions were accepted as normal by countless families who had never known anything different. Crime remained a constant concern, especially in growing cities. Street lighting was limited, and many neighbourhoods became dangerous after dark. People walking alone at night risked robbery or assault. Organised police forces were still developing, meaning citizens often relied on local watchmen whose effectiveness varied greatly. Wealthier residents could afford better protection, while poorer individuals frequently had little defence against criminal activity. Gambling represented another widespread part of society, from aristocrats placing enormous wagers in exclusive clubs to ordinary citizens betting on sporting events. Gambling attracted people from nearly every social class. Some individuals won fortunes, but many lost savings, property, and even their future security. Despite the devastating consequences gambling could bring, society generally tolerated it. Alcohol consumption was equally common. Taverns served as important social centres where people gathered to exchange news, conduct business, and escape daily pressures. Excessive drinking created serious social problems, but it remained deeply woven into everyday culture. For many labourers facing exhausting work and uncertain futures, alcohol provided temporary relief from hardship. Fashion, often remembered as one of the glamorous features of the Regency period, carried its own dangers. Certain clothing styles prioritised appearance over comfort or practicality. Women sometimes wore lightweight garments unsuitable for cold weather, while social pressure encouraged people to endure discomfort in order to appear fashionable. Looking respectable could significantly influence how others treated a person, making fashion more than a simple matter of personal taste. Communication moved far more slowly than today. News travelled by horse, carriage, or ship. A message that now arrives instantly could require days or weeks to reach its destination. Families separated by distance often waited anxiously for letters, uncertain when they would hear from loved ones again. This slower pace shaped relationships, business decisions, and daily life in ways that are difficult for modern people to fully appreciate. As we continue exploring Regency England, the contrast becomes increasingly clear. Behind the image of elegance stood a society filled with risks, hardships, and customs that seem astonishing today. Yet, for the people living through that era, these realities were simply part of the world they knew, accepted without question by millions. Who could scarcely imagine a different way of life? Perhaps one of the most surprising aspects of Regency England was how much importance society placed on reputation. A single rumour could damage a person's standing for years. Among the upper classes especially, public image often mattered almost as much as wealth itself. People carefully monitored their behaviour, speech, clothing, and social connections. An unfortunate scandal could lead to exclusion from important gatherings and opportunities. Women faced particularly strict standards. Actions that might be forgiven in men could permanently harm a woman's reputation. This constant pressure created an environment where appearances often concealed reality beneath elegant manners and polite conversation. Many individuals lived with fears about social judgment. Servants formed another essential but often overlooked part of Regency life. Large households depended on cooks, maids, footmen, housekeepers, and countless other workers. Wealthy families enjoyed comfort because servants performed exhausting labour behind the scenes. Many servants worked from early morning until late at night with little free time. Despite their importance, they occupied a lower social position and were expected to remain nearly invisible while carrying out their duties. For many, service offered one of the few available paths to stable employment. The military also influenced everyday society. Britain was deeply involved in conflicts during this period, including the long struggle against Napoleon. Families worried about sons, brothers, and husbands serving far from home. Military victories inspired patriotic celebrations, while losses brought grief to communities across the country. War affected trade, prices, employment, and political decisions, reaching far beyond the battlefield itself. Superstition remained surprisingly common as well. Although science was advancing, many people still believed in folk remedies, omens, and strange traditions passed down through generations. Unexplained illnesses, unusual weather, or unexpected events sometimes received supernatural explanations. These beliefs provided comfort in a world where many natural phenomena remained poorly understood. Even educated individuals occasionally accepted ideas that modern science has long since disproven. Education varied dramatically depending on social class and gender. Wealthy boys often received extensive schooling, designed to prepare them for leadership roles. Girls might learn music, drawing, and social etiquette, but advanced academic opportunities were limited for many women Poor children frequently received little formal education at all. This unequal access to knowledge helped preserve existing social divisions and restricted opportunities for countless people. Yet despite all these challenges, people still found moments of happiness. Families gathered around fireplaces. Friends shared stories. Musicians entertained guests. And communities celebrated holidays together. Human nature remained remarkably similar to today. People fell in love, pursued ambitions, worried about the future, and searched for meaning in their lives. The difference was that they did so within a world filled with hardships and customs that modern observers often find shocking. The deeper we look into Regency England, the more we discover a society that was far more complicated than the romantic image often presented in books and films. Religion also played a powerful role in Regency society. Church attendance was an expected part of life for many people, and religious values influenced everything from education to politics. Communities often gathered at local churches not only for worship but also to exchange news and maintain social connections. However, religious differences could sometimes create tensions, and not everyone enjoyed the same freedoms that people often take for granted today. The justice system, social hierarchy, and moral expectations were all shaped by beliefs that seemed unquestionable at the time. As the Regency era slowly moved toward its end, change was already beginning to appear on the horizon. New technologies, growing industries, and shifting political ideas would soon transform Britain in dramatic ways. Many customs that had existed for generations would gradually disappear, while others would evolve into something entirely different. Yet the people living during the Regency years could not see the future. To them, their world seemed normal, even permanent. Looking back today, it is easy to focus on the grand estates, elegant clothing, and romantic stories, but the true Regency England was far more complex. It was a place where beauty existed alongside hardship, where luxury stood beside poverty, and where practices that now seem disturbing were accepted without much question. Understanding these realities helps us see history not as a fairy tale, but as the story of real people navigating a world very different from our own. Another reality that often surprises modern observers is how limited personal freedom could be, depending on your position in society. Today, many people expect to choose their own careers, express opinions openly, and move between social groups with relative ease. In Regency England, those possibilities were often restricted by birth, wealth, and family expectations. A person born into poverty faced enormous obstacles when trying to improve their circumstances. Hard work could help, but social mobility was far less common than many imagined. The class system acted as an invisible wall separating different parts of society. The wealthy frequently interacted with other wealthy families, while labourers remained within their own communities. Crossing those boundaries was difficult and sometimes unwelcome. For women, daily life involved numerous unwritten rules. Respectability had to be carefully protected. A young unmarried woman was often expected to avoid situations that might damage her reputation. Even being seen alone with the wrong person could spark gossip. Families closely monitored courtship, because marriage could affect social status and financial security. Many women possessed intelligence ambition, and talent. Yet opportunities to use those abilities were often limited by social expectations. Their futures were frequently shaped by decisions made by fathers, brothers, or husbands. Meanwhile, the rapid growth of towns and cities created new challenges. As populations increased, housing became crowded and public services struggled to keep pace. Streets were noisy, dirty, and filled with activity from sunrise until late evening. Horse-drawn vehicles competed for space with pedestrians, merchants, labourers, and animals. Accidents happened regularly. The smell of smoke from fireplaces mixed with odours from markets, stables, and waste. To modern visitors, the sensory experience of a Regency city would likely feel overwhelming. Even death itself was treated differently than it is today. Funerals were important social events, and mourning customs could be elaborate. Families often kept reminders of deceased loved ones, including locks of hair or personal belongings. Because death was more common and occurred at younger ages, people developed traditions that helped them cope with loss. What might seem unusual or unsettling now often provided comfort to those living through difficult times. As we examine all these details together, a clearer picture emerges. Regency England was not simply an age of romance, grand balls, and elegant manners. It was also a world of strict rules, harsh realities, dangerous work, widespread disease, and deep social divisions. The fascinating thing about history is that every generation accepts certain customs as normal. The people of Regency England rarely questioned many practices that would shock us today. And perhaps that raises an interesting thought before we continue our journey: what parts of our own modern world might appear equally strange to people living 200 years from now. The contrast between town and countryside was another defining feature of Regency England. While cities continued to grow and attract workers seeking opportunities, much of the population still lived in rural communities. Life in the countryside often revolved around the seasons. Farmers depended heavily on weather conditions, and a poor harvest could affect entire regions. Work began early and could be physically exhausting. Men, women, and children all contributed to agricultural tasks that kept families fed and local economies functioning. Although rural areas were sometimes quieter than crowded cities, they offered their own hardships, including isolation, limited medical care, and fewer opportunities for advancement. Communication between distant places remained slow enough that major events could take days or even weeks to become widely known. Imagine hearing about an important battle, political decision, or family emergency long after it had already occurred. Newspapers existed, but they were not instantly available to everyone. Rumours often spread faster than verified information, creating confusion and speculation. In many ways, people experienced a much smaller world than we do today. Most individuals spent their entire lives within a relatively short distance of where they were born. Entertainment reflected this slower pace of life. Without television, radio, or the internet, people relied on books, music, theatre, performances, social gatherings, and conversation. Storytelling remained an important source of amusement. Families and friends gathered in the evenings to share news, discuss local events, or simply enjoy one another's company. While modern technology provides endless entertainment, people during the Regency era found ways to occupy themselves, using far fewer resources. The natural world also played a larger role in daily life. Darkness arrived differently before electric lighting. Once the sun disappeared, much of the world became dimly illuminated by candles, lanterns, or fireplaces. Travelling after dark could be difficult and sometimes dangerous. Storms, heavy rain, and harsh winters affected transportation, work, and survival itself. People paid close attention to weather because it directly influenced nearly every aspect of their lives. Despite all the challenges we have explored, Regency England was also a period of creativity, literature, and cultural change. Writers, artists, and thinkers helped shape ideas that would influence future generations. Yet their achievements existed alongside realities that were often uncomfortable and unjust. This mixture of elegance and hardship is what makes the period so fascinating to study. The same society that produced beautiful architecture and celebrated refinement also tolerated conditions that many people today would consider unacceptable. Understanding both sides of that story allows us to see the Regency era as it truly was. Not a fantasy, but a complex world filled with real people facing real struggles every single day. One aspect of Regency England that many people overlook is how uncertain the future felt for ordinary families. Today, while life certainly has challenges, many people can make long-term plans with a reasonable expectation of stability. During the Regency era, however, a single illness, failed harvest, workplace accident, or economic downturn could completely change a family's circumstances. There were few safety nets available. If the main breadwinner became unable to work, the entire household could quickly fall into poverty. This constant uncertainty shaped how people viewed money, work, and survival. Domestic service remained one of the largest sources of employment throughout the country. In grand houses, servants handled nearly every task imaginable. They cleaned rooms, prepared meals, cared for horses, maintained gardens, carried messages, and attended to the needs of wealthy families. Many servants lived where they worked, following strict schedules and rules. Their days were long and physically demanding. While some developed close relationships with employers, others experienced difficult conditions, with little opportunity to improve their position. Yet for many poor individuals, service offered more security than other forms of employment. Education was slowly expanding, but access remained unequal. Wealthy families invested heavily in tutors and private schools. Their children studied languages, history, mathematics, and social etiquette. Poorer children often received only basic instruction, if any at all. Many learned practical skills directly through work rather than formal education. This difference helped preserve existing social divisions, ensuring that privilege often passed from one generation to the next. The justice system could be particularly frightening for those without wealth or influence. Legal proceedings were not always fair by modern standards, and punishments could be severe. Prisons themselves were unpleasant places where disease, overcrowding, and poor conditions were common. Some prisoners depended on family support simply to obtain adequate food while incarcerated. The experience of imprisonment often punished entire families, rather than only the individual accused of wrongdoing. Perhaps the most striking lesson from Regency England is how adaptable people can be. Conditions that seem unbearable today were accepted because they formed part of everyday reality. People found ways to build friendships, raise families, celebrate special occasions, and pursue happiness despite the difficulties surrounding them. The same society that produced beautiful architecture and celebrated refinement also tolerated conditions that many people today would consider unacceptable. Understanding both sides of that story allows us to see the Regency era as it truly was. Not a fantasy, but a complex world filled with real people facing real struggles every single day. One aspect of Regency England that many people overlook is how uncertain the future felt for ordinary families. Today, while life certainly has challenges, many people can make long-term plans with a reasonable expectation of stability. During the Regency era, however, or single illness, failed harvest, workplace accident, or economic downturn could completely change a family's circumstances. There were few safety nets available. If the main breadwinner became unable to work, the entire household could quickly fall into poverty. This constant uncertainty shaped how people viewed money, work, and survival. Domestic service remained one of the largest sources of employment throughout the country. In grand houses, servants handled nearly every task imaginable. They cleaned rooms, prepared meals, cared for horses, maintained gardens, carried messages, and attended to the needs of wealthy families. Many servants lived where they worked, following strict schedules and rules. Their days were long and physically demanding. While some developed close relationships with employers, others experienced difficult conditions, with little opportunity to improve their position. Yet for many poor individuals, service offered more security than other forms of employment. Education was slowly expanding, but access remained unequal. Wealthy families invested heavily in tutors and private schools. Their children studied languages, history, mathematics, and social etiquette. Poorer children often received only basic instruction, if any at all. Many learned practical skills directly through work rather than formal education. This difference helped preserve existing social divisions, ensuring that privilege often passed from one generation to the next. The justice system could be particularly frightening for those without wealth or influence. Legal proceedings were not always fair by modern standards, and punishments could be severe. Prisons themselves were unpleasant places where disease, overcrowding, and poor conditions were common. Some prisoners depended on family support simply to obtain adequate food while incarcerated. The experience of imprisonment often punished entire families, rather than only the individual accused of wrongdoing. Perhaps the most striking lesson from Regency England is how adaptable people can be. Conditions that seem unbearable today were accepted because they formed part of everyday reality. People found ways to build friendships, raise families, celebrate special occasions, and pursue happiness despite the difficulties surrounding them. Human resilience allowed communities to continue, even when life was uncertain and often harsh. As we move deeper into the hidden side of Regency England, the elegant image presented in novels and paintings continues to fade. Behind every grand ballroom stood servants working through the night. Behind every fashionable outfit stood strict social expectations. Behind every beautiful country estate stood labourers, whose hard work made such luxury possible. The Regency era was not simply an age of refinement. It was a world built upon contrasts, where privilege and hardship existed side by side, shaping the lives of millions in ways both fascinating and disturbing. Even the homes of wealthy families were far less comfortable than many modern people imagine. Grand houses looked impressive from the outside, but heating was often inconsistent. Rooms could be drafty during winter, and lighting depended on candles or oil lamps. A simple task like reading after sunset required careful use of expensive candles. Nighttime brought darkness that modern cities rarely experience. Once the fires burned low and the candles were extinguished, most homes became quiet and dim. This natural rhythm encouraged people to sleep earlier and structure their lives around daylight. Health remained a constant concern regardless of social class. Wealth could improve living conditions, but it could not guarantee protection from disease. Epidemics swept through communities with little warning, and even prominent families lost loved ones unexpectedly. Child mortality was especially heartbreaking. Many parents experienced the loss of children long before adulthood, a tragedy so common that it became a painful part of everyday life. The emotional toll of such losses was enormous. Yet people continued forward because they had no other choice. Nature itself often determined success or failure. Farmers depended on favourable weather. Merchants relied on safe transportation routes, and sailors faced dangerous seas. A storm could destroy crops, delay shipments, or claim lives. Unlike today, when technology helps reduce many risks, Regency society remained closely tied to forces beyond human control. People respected nature not only for its beauty, but also for its power. When we look beyond the elegant portraits and romantic stories, we discover a society filled with challenges that modern audiences rarely consider. The people of Regency England lived in a world where hardship, uncertainty, and strict social rules shaped nearly every decision. Yet they also displayed remarkable determination, adapting to circumstances that would seem difficult for many of us today. Their lives remind us that history is not simply a collection of famous events and powerful individuals. It is the story of ordinary people navigating a complicated world, doing their best to build meaningful lives within the limits of their time. As the Regency era continued, many people believed the social order around them would last forever. Aristocrats expected to remain powerful. Labourers expected to work hard for modest rewards. And families generally accepted the role society assigned to them. Few could imagine how dramatically Britain would change in the decades ahead. Factories would expand, railways would transform travel, and new political movements would challenge long-established traditions. Yet, during the Regency years, those changes were only beginning to appear on the horizon. For ordinary people, daily life remained focused on immediate concerns. Food had to be earned, homes maintained, and families cared for. Most individuals spent little time thinking about how future historians might view their world. They simply adapted to the customs, expectations, and limitations surrounding them. What is fascinating is how normal even the harshest Realities seem too. Those who experienced them every day. Public executions, child labour, limited medical knowledge, strict class divisions, and unequal rights were not unusual exceptions. They were woven into the fabric of society itself. Many of the era's unwritten rules were enforced not by laws but by public opinion. Neighbours observed one another closely, gossip travelled quickly, and reputations could rise or fall based on community judgment. Social pressure encouraged conformity and discouraged behaviour considered improper. People learned from a young age what was expected of them and what consequences might follow if they stepped outside accepted boundaries. This created a society that often valued appearance, respectability, and tradition above individual freedom. At the same time, the Regency period was filled with ambition. Merchants sought wealth, writers pursued recognition, military officers chased glory, and families worked tirelessly to improve their circumstances. Hope existed alongside hardship. People dreamed of better futures for themselves and their children, just as people do today. That shared human desire connects us to the past, despite the enormous differences between our worlds. When we examine Regency England closely, the romantic image often portrayed in popular culture begins to look incomplete. The elegant dances, fashionable clothing, and magnificent estates were real, but they represented only part of the story. Behind them stood servants working long hours, labourers struggling to survive, families facing disease, and communities adapting to challenges that modern societies have largely overcome. Perhaps that is why this period remains so fascinating. It reminds us that history is rarely as simple as it appears. Every age contains beauty and suffering, progress and injustice, comfort and hardship. Regency England was no exception. Beneath its polished surface existed a world that could be surprisingly difficult, sometimes disturbing, and endlessly complex for the people who called it home. Another interesting truth about Regency England is that people often measured success very differently than we do today. Modern society frequently celebrates innovation, personal achievement, and individual expression. In the Regency period, however, family background, social connections, and reputation carried enormous weight. A person could be intelligent and hardworking, yet still find opportunities limited because of the class into which they were born. Wealth opened doors, while poverty often closed them before a person even had the chance to try. The gap between rich and poor remained visible everywhere. In fashionable districts, elegant carriages rolled through clean streets while wealthy families attended parties, concerts, and social gatherings only a short distance away. Poorer neighbourhoods struggled with overcrowding, disease, and insecurity. These different worlds existed side by side, yet their inhabitants often lived completely different lives. Many members of the upper classes rarely experienced the hardships faced by labourers, servants, and factory workers. Likewise, countless poor families could only imagine the luxury enjoyed by aristocrats. Work itself was far more physical than it is for many people today. Everyday tasks required significant effort. Water had to be carried, fires maintained, clothing washed by hand, and food prepared without modern appliances. Even simple household duties consumed time and energy. Life demanded constant labour from nearly everyone, regardless of social status. Technology had not yet removed many of the burdens that modern people barely notice. Travel remained an adventure filled with uncertainty. Roads could become nearly impassable during bad weather, and long journeys required patience. People planned carefully because delays were common. Visiting relatives, conducting business, or transporting goods often took far longer than expected. The world felt larger because distances were harder to overcome. Yet despite all these challenges, people still found joy in ordinary moments. Families shared meals together. Friends gathered for conversation. Musicians entertained audiences. And communities celebrated holidays and local traditions. Love, friendship, ambition, and hope existed just as strongly then as they do now. Human emotions changed very little even when the world around them looked completely different. Back, it becomes clear that Regency England was neither a paradise nor a nightmare. It was a complex society filled with contradictions. It produced remarkable culture and literature while accepting practices that seem shocking today. It offered luxury to some and hardship to many others. Understanding these contrasts helps us move beyond romantic myths and see the era for what it truly was a fascinating chapter of history shaped by real people living through extraordinary times without realizing they would one day become part of the past. As the Regency era slowly drew to a close, many of the customs people considered completely normal would eventually begin to disappear. Advances in medicine would make surgery safer. Public executions would become less common before eventually ending altogether. Educational opportunities would gradually expand, and new ideas about social reform and equality would challenge traditions that had existed for generations. But for the people living during the Regency years, these future changes remained impossible to predict. They could only understand the world through the experiences of their own time. History often teaches us an important lesson. People rarely recognize the strange aspects of their own society while they are living in it. The customs, beliefs, and habits surrounding them simply feel normal. Regency England was no different. Practices that seem shocking to modern observers were accepted because they had existed for so long. Children worked because that was how families survived. Medical treatments were trusted because few alternatives existed. Strict social classes endured because most people believed they were a natural part of life. Looking back now, it is easy to judge these customs, but understanding them helps us appreciate how much societies can change over time. At the same time, many qualities of human nature remain unchanged. The people of Regency England loved their families, worried about their futures, celebrated successes, and mourned losses just as we do today. Parents hoped their children would have better lives. Friends supported one another through difficult moments. Communities came together during times of crisis. Despite the enormous differences between their world and ours, the emotions that shaped daily life were remarkably familiar. Perhaps that is why this period continues to capture our imagination. Beneath the elegant clothing, grand estates, and famous novels was a society filled with ordinary people, trying to navigate an uncertain world. Some experienced privilege and comfort, while many others faced hardship and struggle. Together, their lives created the complex and fascinating story of Regency England. And as we leave this chapter of history behind, we are reminded that every era has customs future generations may find surprising. The things we accept today might one day appear just as strange as the practices of Regency England seem to us now. History is not only a window into the past, it is also a mirror that helps us better understand ourselves and the world we live in. One topic that reveals just how different Regency England was from the modern world is the relationship between servants and their employers. In wealthy households, servants were everywhere, yet they were expected to remain almost invisible. A guest attending a grand dinner might admire the food, the decorations, and the elegance of the evening without ever thinking about the dozens of workers who made it possible. Cooks woke before dawn to prepare meals. Maids cleaned rooms, washed clothing, and carried water throughout the day. Footmen stood for hours attending guests. Housekeepers managed entire staffs and ensured every detail ran smoothly. Their labour supported the lifestyle that the upper classes enjoyed. The expectations placed on servants were strict. They were expected to be respectful at all times, follow household rules, and maintain loyalty to their employers. Many lived under the same roof as the families they served, which meant work and personal life were often impossible to separate. A servant's day could begin before sunrise and continue until long after everyone else had gone to bed. Despite these challenges, domestic service remained one of the most desirable forms of employment, available to many poor people because it offered food, shelter, and a relatively stable income. Another disturbing reality involved debt. Regency England had a serious problem with personal debt, affecting both the rich and the poor. Wealthy individuals sometimes spent beyond their means to maintain appearances, purchasing expensive clothing, hosting extravagant events, and living lifestyles they could not truly afford. Poor families often borrowed simply to survive difficult periods. Falling into debt could have severe consequences. Some individuals ended up in debtors' prisons, where they could remain for long periods because they lacked the money needed to secure their release. The idea of imprisoning someone for being unable to pay what they owed seems strange today, but it was accepted as a normal part of the legal system. Markets were also far different from modern supermarkets. Fresh food was often purchased daily because it spoiled quickly. Streets bustled with vendors selling vegetables, meat, bread, fish, and countless other products. The quality of food varied significantly, and regulations were limited compared to modern standards. Some merchants diluted products or used questionable ingredients to increase profits. Consumers often had little protection against fraud. Trust played an important role in deciding where people chose to shop. The more closely we examine Regency England, the clearer it becomes that daily life involved challenges modern people rarely consider. Behind every elegant portrait stood a world of hard work, uncertainty, strict expectations, and social rules that governed nearly every aspect of existence. What many remember as an age of refinement was also an age filled with struggles that most people simply accepted as part of every life. The world of work in Regency England was often far harsher than many people realise. There were no modern labour laws protecting workers from long hours or dangerous conditions. A person was expected to work as much as their employer demanded if they wanted. to keep their position. In workshops, factories, docks, and farms, injuries were common. If someone became seriously hurt, they could lose their livelihood almost overnight. There was little financial support available for those unable to work. Survival often depended on family members, charitable organisations, or local communities. For many young men, joining the military or the navy seemed like one of the few opportunities to improve their circumstances. However, military service carried enormous risks. Soldiers faced disease, harsh discipline, poor living conditions, and the constant possibility of death during conflict. Sailors often spent months or years away from home. Life aboard a ship was physically demanding, and storms could turn an ordinary voyage into a deadly disaster. Yet, despite these dangers, thousands chose such careers because other options were limited. The role of social etiquette was another feature that modern people might find exhausting. Rules governed nearly every interaction among the upper and middle classes. People were expected to know how to address others properly, how to behave at social events, and even how long a visit should last. A mistake in etiquette could lead to embarrassment or damage a person's reputation. Entire books were written explaining proper behaviour. While these rules created order within society, they also placed enormous pressure on individuals to constantly monitor their actions. Entertainment among the wealthy often centred around social gatherings, balls, dinners, musical performances, and private parties provided opportunities to strengthen connections and discuss business or marriage arrangements. These events could appear glamorous, but they also functioned as important social arenas where status was displayed and judged. Families invested significant resources into maintaining appearances, because social success often brought practical advantages. Meanwhile, ordinary labourers found entertainment in simpler ways. Local fairs, public houses, sporting events, and community celebrations offered moments of relief from demanding work schedules. These gatherings allowed people to socialise, share stories, and temporarily forget the difficulties of everyday life. Human beings have always sought enjoyment and companionship, regardless of their circumstances. What makes Regency England so fascinating is that it existed between two worlds. Many traditions from earlier centuries still shaped daily life, while new ideas and technologies were beginning to emerge. Society stood at the edge of enormous change without fully realising it. The people living through the period experienced it as ordinary life, never knowing that future generations would look back on many of their customs with amazement, curiosity, and sometimes disbelief. One area where the differences between Regency England and the modern world become especially clear is communication. Within families, today, a message can travel across the world in seconds. But during the Regency period, families separated by distance often waited weeks or even months for news. A letter might be delayed by weather, poor roads, or transportation problems. During that time, people had no way of knowing whether loved ones were healthy, safe, or even alive. The arrival of a letter could become the most important event of the week, bringing relief, excitement, or sometimes devastating news. Weather also had a much greater impact on daily life than it does today. Heavy rain could turn roads into thick mud, making travel nearly impossible. Harsh winters increased the cost of food and fuel while making work more difficult. Farmers depended heavily on favourable conditions, and poor weather could affect entire communities. Unlike modern societies, which rely on advanced technology to overcome many environmental challenges, Regency England remained closely connected to the natural world. Another surprising aspect of the era was how little privacy many people had. Large families often shared limited living space. Servants lived among the households they served, and communities were tightly connected. Neighbours frequently knew one another's business, and personal matters could quickly become public knowledge. Gossip spread rapidly, especially in small towns where everyone knew each other. Maintaining a good reputation, therefore, required constant effort. Many people also lived with fears that are uncommon today. Fear of disease, fear of poverty, fear of losing employment, and fear of social disgrace influenced countless decisions. A single mistake could have serious consequences. Yet, despite these worries, people continued to build friendships, raise children, pursue ambitions, and enjoy the simple pleasures available to them. The deeper we explore Regency England, the more we realise that its people were not so different from us. They laughed, worried, hoped, and dreamed just as we do. What separates us is not human nature, but the world in which they lived. Their society accepted realities that now seem shocking, while our own society accepts things they might have found equally strange. That contrast is what makes history so fascinating and reminds you how much the world can change within just a few generations. The food people ate in Regency England also reflected the deep divisions within society. Wealthy families enjoyed access to a wide variety of meats, imported goods, fine wines, and elaborate desserts. Their dining tables displayed status as much as nourishment. A grand dinner could involve multiple courses served by teams of servants, with guests expected to understand complex rules of etiquette. For the rich, meals were often social, events designed to strengthen relationships and demonstrate wealth. For ordinary families, however, food was much simpler. Bread, porridge, potatoes, vegetables, and occasional meat formed the basis of many diets. During difficult times, families had to carefully stretch every meal. Rising food prices could create serious hardship, especially for labourers whose wages remained low. A poor harvest in one region could affect prices across the country, making survival even more difficult for those already struggling. Another normal but disturbing aspect of life was the lack of modern safety standards. Buildings, workplaces, roads, and public spaces contained hazards that people simply accepted. Fires could spread rapidly through crowded neighbourhoods. Chimneys sometimes collapsed. Industrial equipment injured workers. Horse-drawn carriages caused accidents on busy streets. Many dangers that would trigger strict regulations today were treated as unfortunate but ordinary parts of life. The treatment of criminals provides another glimpse into the mindset of the era. Society placed great emphasis on punishment as a warning to others. Public displays of justice were intended to create fear and discourage wrongdoing. Authorities believed harsh consequences protected social order. While some people criticised excessive punishments, many citizens viewed them as necessary. The idea that rehabilitation should be a major goal of the justice system had not yet become widely accepted. Class Distinctions appeared even in the way people spoke. Accents, vocabulary, and manners often revealed a person's social background within. Moments of meeting them. Individuals who wished to improve their position sometimes tried to adopt the speech and behaviour of higher classes. Yet society remained highly aware of these differences, and moving between classes was rarely easy. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about Regency England is how people adapted to circumstances that would seem difficult for us today. They navigated a world without modern medicine, electricity, instant communication, or social protections. They faced challenges with a resilience born from necessity. Their daily lives required patience, endurance, and a willingness to accept uncertainty. As we continue exploring this fascinating period, it becomes increasingly clear that Regency England was far more than elegant ballrooms and romantic novels. It was a society built upon complex traditions, strict hierarchies, and realities that could be both impressive and deeply unsettling. The further we look beyond the polished image, the more intriguing the true story becomes. Another feature of Regency England that modern people often underestimate is the importance of appearance. Looking respectable could influence how others treated you, what opportunities became available, and even how trustworthy you seemed. Clothing was more than protection from the weather. It acted as a social signal. A person's outfit could reveal wealth, occupation, family status, and place within society. For many families, maintaining a respectable appearance required considerable effort. Even when money was scarce, some people spent beyond their means simply to avoid appearing poor. The pace of life was also very different. Today, many people live in a world filled with constant notifications, rapid transportation, and endless streams of information. In Regency England, life generally moved more slowly. News travelled gradually, journeys required patience, and many tasks took far longer to complete. While this slower pace might sound peaceful, it often came with frustration. Delays were common, information was limited, and unexpected problems could disrupt plans for weeks. Seasonal changes had a powerful influence on everyday routines. During winter, shorter days reduced working hours and increased dependence on candles and fireplaces. Summer brought longer periods of activity, but also created challenges related to food, preservation, and sanitation. People paid close attention to the seasons because they affected employment, travel, agriculture, and household expenses. Modern technology has reduced many of these concerns, but Regency families lived much closer to nature's rhythms. Social gatherings served important purposes beyond entertainment. A dinner party, dance, or community event provided opportunities to exchange information, build relationships, discuss business, and arrange marriages. In a society without modern communication networks, face-to-face interaction carried tremendous importance. Personal connections often determined success. Knowing the right people could open doors that talent alone could not. There was also a strong sense of duty within many families. Children were expected to respect their parents. Servants were expected to obey employers. And individuals were expected to fulfill the roles assigned to them by society. While some people challenged these expectations, Most accepted them as part of the natural order. Freedom existed, but it was often limited by tradition, class, and social pressure. When we examine all these details together, Regency England becomes far more than a collection of famous buildings and elegant fashions. It was a living, breathing society filled with contradictions. It celebrated refinement while tolerating inequality. It admired progress while holding tightly to tradition. It offered privilege to some and hardship to many others. These contrasts are what make the era so compelling to explore, revealing a world that was at once familiar and completely foreign to modern eyes. The role of marriage in Regency England was often far more practical than modern romantic stories suggest. While love certainly existed, marriage was frequently viewed as an economic and social arrangement. Families considered wealth, property, social status, and future security when choosing suitable matches. Among the upper classes, a marriage could strengthen family influence, protect fortunes, or improve social standing. Young people sometimes had limited control over these decisions, especially when powerful relatives became involved. The idea of marrying purely for personal happiness was not always considered the highest priority. Inheritance laws also shaped countless lives. Property and wealth often passed through specific family lines, sometimes favouring male heirs. This meant that the future of entire families could depend on the birth of a son. Women occasionally found themselves financially vulnerable if a husband died or if family property passed to another relative. Such rules were considered normal by many people at the time, even though they created significant inequalities. The countryside, often portrayed as peaceful and idyllic, had its own hardships. Agricultural workers laboured long hours in all kinds of weather. Their income depended heavily on local conditions and seasonal demands. During difficult years, employment could become uncertain. Many rural families lived modest lives and possessed few comforts. Yet strong community ties often helped people endure difficult periods. Neighbours relied on one another for assistance, information, and support during times of hardship. Animals played a much larger role in daily life than they do for most people today. Horses powered transportation. Farming depended on working animals, and livestock represented valuable sources of food and income. The health of animals could directly affect a family's survival. A farmer losing a horse or several animals might face serious financial difficulties because society depended so heavily on animal labour. Daily life moved at the pace animals could sustain. Another striking difference involved the concept of leisure time. Modern people often separate work and personal life, but in Regency England those boundaries were less clear. Household responsibilities, agricultural tasks, and business obligations frequently occupied most of the day. Free time existed, but many people had far less of it than we enjoy today. Entertainment, therefore, carried special importance because opportunities for relaxation were relatively limited. As we continue exploring the realities hidden beneath the elegant surface of Regency England, it becomes clear that almost every aspect of life was shaped by factors modern people rarely think about. Social status, inheritance, family expectations, seasonal changes, and economic uncertainty influence decisions from childhood to old age. The period's famous elegance was real, but it rested upon a foundation of hard work, strict traditions, and realities that could often be far more difficult than the romantic image preserved in popular culture. Religion influenced nearly every part of Regency life. Church attendance was not simply a personal choice for many people. It was an expected part of being a respectable member of society. Sundays often revolved around religious services, and local churches served as important centres for community life. People met neighbours, exchanged news, and reinforced social connections through these gatherings. Religious beliefs shaped attitudes toward morality, family, education, and even politics. A person's reputation could be affected by whether they followed the standards expected by their community. Time itself was experienced differently during the Regency era. Without smartphones, televisions, or constant streams of information, daily life followed a more predictable rhythm. The rising and setting of the sun influenced schedules far more than they do today. People organised their activities around daylight, especially in rural areas. Evenings were often quieter, with families gathering around fireplaces to read, so play music or simply talk. While life could be difficult, these moments created strong family bonds that many people valued deeply. Aging also looked different from what we see today. Life expectancy was lower, and many individuals faced health problems that modern medicine can now treat or prevent. Someone considered middle-aged in Regency England might already be viewed as entering the later stages of life. Physical labour, disease, and limited healthcare often left visible marks on people much earlier than we would expect today. Growing old was respected in some ways, but it also brought significant challenges. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Regency England is how ordinary everything seemed to those who lived through it. The strict class system, dangerous medical treatments, harsh punishments, and unequal opportunities were rarely questioned by most people. These realities formed the background of everyday life. People focused on earning a living, caring for family members, and navigating the world they knew. When we study this period, we often discover that history is filled with surprises. The elegant image presented in paintings and novels tells only part of the story. Behind the beautiful clothing and grand houses stood real people facing uncertainty, hardship, and challenges that would shock many modern observers. Yet they persevered, adapted, and built lives within the limits of their time. That balance between beauty and difficulty is what makes Regency England such a fascinating chapter in human history. Another reality that shaped Regency England was the limited understanding people had of the wider world. While Britain was a powerful nation with trade routes stretching across continents, most ordinary citizens rarely travelled far from their hometowns. A farmer in a rural village might spend nearly his entire life within the same region. News from distant countries arrived slowly, and many people learned about foreign places only through newspapers, travellers' stories, or conversations with sailors and merchants. The world felt much larger and more mysterious than it does today. The importance of family connections cannot be overstated. Families often functioned as a person's primary source of financial support, protection, and opportunity. If someone lost a job, became ill, or faced hardship, relatives were usually expected to help. Strong family networks could improve a person's chances of success. while those without such support often struggled. Family reputation also mattered greatly. The actions of one relative could affect how an entire family was viewed by society. Education among the wealthy focused not only on knowledge but also on behaviour. Young gentlemen learned how to speak, dress, and conduct themselves in public. Young women were often taught music, drawing, language skills, and social etiquette. These lessons prepared them for the role society expected them to fulfill. However, many talented individuals never had access to such opportunities simply because they were born into poorer circumstances. Another challenge involved information itself. Rumours frequently spread faster than facts. Without instant communication, misunderstandings could persist for weeks or months. People often relied on word of mouth, letters, or local newspapers, which sometimes contained incomplete or inaccurate information. This created a society where uncertainty was common, and reliable news could be difficult to obtain. Even simple household tasks required tremendous effort. Preparing meals, cleaning clothing, heating rooms, and maintaining a home demanded hours of daily labour. Many conveniences that modern people barely notice did not exist. There were no washing machines, electric stoves, refrigerators, or central heating systems. Everyday life required patience, skill, and constant work simply to maintain a reasonable standard of living. Yet despite these limitations, people continued to dream about the future. Parents hoped their children would achieve greater success. Workers sought better opportunities. Families saved money whenever possible in hopes of improving their circumstances. The desire for a better life existed just as strongly then as it does now. This is what makes Regency England so fascinating to explore. The era appears elegant from a distance, but the closer we look, the more complex it becomes. Behind every polished ballroom floor and every fashionable outfit stood countless ordinary people working hard, facing uncertainty, and trying to build meaningful lives in a world that was often far more difficult than the romantic stories would have us believe. One of the most overlooked aspects of Regency England was how fragile comfort could be. A family might appear stable and respectable one year, only to face serious difficulties the next. A failed business, poor harvest, illness, or unexpected death could dramatically change a household's future. Financial security was far less certain than many people imagine. Even some members of the middle and upper classes worried constantly about maintaining their position in society. Appearances often hid struggles that outsiders never saw. The legal rights people enjoyed also depended heavily on their social status and gender. Wealthy individuals generally had more influence and access to opportunities, while poorer citizens often had fewer ways to defend their interests. Women faced particularly significant limitations. Many legal and financial decisions remained under the control of fathers or husbands. Talented and intelligent women certainly existed, but society often restricted how much independence they could exercise. These limitations were viewed by many as natural, even though they shaped the lives of millions. Another surprising feature of the era was how important local communities were. Because travel and communication were slower, People depended heavily on neighbours and nearby acquaintances. A person's reputation within their local area could influence employment, opportunities, friendships, business relationships, and even marriage prospects. Communities often provided support during difficult times, but they could also be highly judgmental. Social pressure encouraged people to follow accepted customs and traditions, whether continued to affect nearly every aspect of life. A severe winter could increase food prices, reduce employment opportunities, and make transportation difficult. Heavy rain damaged roads and delayed travel. Farmers watched the skies closely because their livelihoods depended on conditions they could not control. Modern technology shields us from many of these concerns, but Regency families lived much closer to the realities of nature. Perhaps the most fascinating lesson from studying Regency England is realizing how adaptable people are. Human beings have an incredible ability to accept circumstances as normal, even when those circumstances seem harsh by modern standards. The people of this era did not wake up each morning thinking they lived in a difficult or unusual world. To them, it was simply life. They focused on raising families, earning a living, maintaining friendships, and finding happiness where they could. As we continue looking beneath the polished surface of Regency society, the contrast remains striking. Elegant manners existed alongside severe punishments. Beautiful homes stood near poverty and hardship. Refinement and struggle were woven together in ways that make this period both fascinating and unsettling. The deeper we explore, the more we discover that the true story of Regency England is far richer and more complicated than the romantic image often remembered today. The more we examine Regency England, the more we realise how much daily life depended on patience. Modern people are accustomed to quick solutions. If we need information, we search for it instantly. If we want to travel, we can cross great distances in a matter of hours. During the Regency era, however, nearly everything required time. Letters took days or weeks to arrive. Journeys were slow and often uncomfortable. Business deals could take months to complete. People learned to live with delays because there was no alternative. Another interesting aspect of the period was the importance of social gatherings as a source of information. Without modern media, much of what people learned came through conversations. Local events, political developments, family news, and business opportunities were often discussed in drawing rooms, coffee houses, inns, and markets. A person's social network could be just as valuable as money, because information frequently travelled through personal connections. The expectation of duty shaped many lives as well. Individuals were often judged by how well they fulfilled the responsibilities assigned to them by society. Landowners were expected to manage estates, servants to obey employers, children to respect parents, and wives to maintain households. Whether people agreed with these expectations or not, they influenced daily decisions and social relationships. Challenging them could lead to criticism or exclusion. Health remained a constant uncertainty. Even minor illnesses could become dangerous because Effective treatments were limited. Families often relied on home remedies and local knowledge when dealing with sickness. Doctors existed, but medical understanding was still developing. Many people lived with the awareness that an unexpected illness could alter their future without warning. This reality made life feel less predictable than it does for many people today. There was also a strong emphasis on self-control and proper behaviour, especially among the upper classes. Public displays of emotion were often discouraged, and individuals were expected to behave with dignity even during difficult circumstances. Maintaining composure became a sign of good character. Behind this calm exterior, however, people experience the same fears, hopes, disappointments, and ambitions that humans have always felt. As we continue exploring this world, it becomes clear that Regency England was built upon a delicate balance of tradition, hierarchy, and social expectations. People navigated a society where status mattered greatly. Opportunities were unevenly distributed, and daily life could change suddenly through circumstances beyond their control. Yet they adapted, endured, and created a culture that continues to fascinate historians centuries later. The deeper we look, the more layers of this remarkable period begin to reveal themselves. Another factor that shaped life in Regency England was the constant awareness of social rank. People rarely entered a room without understanding where they stood in relation to everyone else. Titles, wealth, family history, and occupation all influenced how a person was treated. These distinctions affected everything from seating, arrangements at dinners, to who could associate with whom. While modern societies still have differences in wealth and status, Regency England placed far greater importance on visible social hierarchy. The economy also affected daily life in ways many people could not escape. Prices of food, fuel, and basic necessities often fluctuated. When costs increased, poor families felt the impact immediately. Rise in bread prices could mean difficult choices about how to spend limited income. Economic hardships sometimes led to unrest as people struggled to meet their basic needs. For many labourers, life involved a constant effort to stay one step ahead of poverty. Education and knowledge were becoming increasingly valued, but access remained uneven. Books were expensive for many families, and literacy rates varied depending on region and social class. Those who could read gained access to newspapers, literature, and new ideas that were beginning to spread across Britain. Knowledge offered opportunities, but not everyone had the chance to obtain it. This gap between those with education and those without reinforced many of the social divisions already present. The pace of change itself was becoming noticeable. New inventions, economic developments, and political debates were slowly transforming society. Some people welcomed these changes, while others viewed them with suspicion. Every generation experiences moments when old traditions meet new ideas, and Regency England was no exception. Many customs that seemed permanent were already beginning to face challenges, even if most people did not yet realise how dramatically the future would differ from the past. What makes this period so fascinating is that it stood on the edge of transformation. The world still contained many practices that seem strange or disturbing today, yet signs of modernisation were already appearing. The people living through these years occupied a unique moment in history, caught between older ways of life and a rapidly changing future. Their experiences help us understand not only the Regency era itself, but also how societies evolve over time, adapting to new realities while holding on to familiar traditions. As Regency England moved forward, many people remained deeply connected to traditions that had existed for generations. Customs were passed from parents to children, and questioning long-established practices was often discouraged. Society valued stability because stability created order. People knew what was expected of them, what roles they were supposed to fulfill, and how they were expected to behave. While this structure provided a sense of predictability, it also limited personal freedom. For many individuals who wished to pursue different paths, the influence of wealth reached into nearly every corner of life. Money determined where a person lived, what education they received, what opportunities were available, and even who they were likely to marry. Wealthy families could protect themselves from many hardships through property, investments, and social connections. Poor families, on the other hand, often lived much closer to crisis. A bad season, a lost job, or an unexpected illness could threaten everything they had worked to build. This imbalance created a society where fortune and hardship often existed side by side. Respectability remained one of the most valuable social currencies of the era. A good reputation could open doors, while a damaged one could close them just as quickly. People carefully managed how they dressed, spoke, and interacted with others. Public image mattered enormously, because communities paid close attention to behaviour. Gossip spread rapidly, and once a story began circulating, it could be difficult to escape. For this reason, many individuals spent considerable effort maintaining appearances even when their private lives were filled with difficulties. At the same time, the Regency era was a period of remarkable resilience. Ordinary people faced challenges that would seem overwhelming to many modern observers. Yet they continued to build families, maintain friendships, and pursue their goals. They adapted to uncertainty because uncertainty was a normal part of life. Every day required practical problem-solving, patience, and determination. Perhaps that is the most important thing too. Remember, when looking back at Regency England, it was not simply a world of elegant dances and fashionable clothing, nor was it only a world of hardship and inequality. It was a society filled with real people trying to make the best of the circumstances they were given. Some succeeded, some struggled, and most lived somewhere in between. Their experiences remind us that history is never as simple as it first appears. Behind every famous era are millions of ordinary lives, each contributing to the larger story in ways that are often forgotten but no less important. The relationship between people and authority was also very different in Regency England. Most citizens had little influence over major political decisions. Government, land ownership, and power were concentrated in the hands of a relatively small portion of the population. Ordinary workers, servants, and labourers often felt the effects of laws and policies without having much ability to shape them. This imbalance was considered normal by many people of the time, even though it would seem unfair to modern observers. Local communities, therefore, became extremely important. Since national institutions often felt distant, people relied heavily on family members, neighbours, church leaders, employers, and local officials. In times of hardship, assistance usually came from nearby individuals rather than large organisations. Communities celebrated together, mourned together, and faced challenges together. This created strong social bonds. But it also meant that people were often subject to intense scrutiny from those around them. Another striking feature of Regency life was how closely identity was tied to occupation. A person's work often defined their place in society. Farmers, merchants, servants, craftsmen, soldiers, and landowners each occupied distinct positions within the social structure. Career changes were possible but far less common than they are today. Many children followed the same professions as their parents because opportunities were limited and expectations were clear. The natural environment remained a powerful force in everyday existence. Rivers served as transportation routes. Weather influenced economic success, and seasonal changes affected nearly every household. Unlike modern societies that depend heavily on technology, Regency England remained closely connected to the rhythms of nature. A storm, flood, or poor harvest could impact thousands of lives. People respected these forces because they understood how little control they truly had over them. Despite all the difficulties we have explored, there was also a strong sense of continuity. Traditions connected generations. Families passed down stories, values, and customs that gave meaning to daily life. Many people found comfort in familiar routines and shared beliefs. These traditions helped communities endure periods of uncertainty and change. The deeper we look into Regency England, the more we discover a world filled with contradictions. It was an age of refinement and hardship, elegance and inequality, ambition and limitation. People lived within a system that often seemed strange to modern eyes. Yet they adapted to it because it was the only world they knew. Understanding that reality allows us to move beyond romantic myths and appreciate the true complexity of this fascinating period in history. The story of Regency England is ultimately the story of human beings learning to navigate a society that was both beautiful and deeply imperfect. One of the most revealing ways to understand Regency England is to imagine living a completely ordinary day as an average person. You would wake up without electric lights, central heating, or modern conveniences. The weather outside might determine much of what happened next. If you worked on a farm, in our workshop or event, the day would likely involve hours of physical labour. Tasks that modern machines now complete in minutes could consume a significant portion of your day. Life demanded effort at nearly every step. For many people, security was never guaranteed. Employment could disappear, illness could strike, and unexpected expenses could create serious difficulties. Because there were limited systems of support, individuals often depended heavily on family and local communities. This reliance encouraged strong personal relationships. But it also meant that hardship could spread through entire families rather than affecting only one person. The concept of personal privacy was also very different. In crowded homes, busy towns, and close-knit villages, much of life took place in view of others. People knew their neighbours, and neighbours often knew a great deal about them. Reputation became important because word travelled quickly. A person's actions could influence how employers, friends, and community members viewed them. This constant awareness of public opinion shaped behaviour in countless ways. Many people also lived with a sense of duty that modern audiences might find surprising. Responsibilities to family, employer, church, and community were often placed above personal desires. Individuals were expected to contribute to the stability of society by fulfilling their roles properly. While some found comfort in this structure, others undoubtedly felt constrained by it. Yet, challenging these expectations was rarely easy. As the years passed, however, small signs of change continued to appear. New ideas about politics, education, industry, and social reform slowly gained attention. The foundations of the old world remained strong, but cracks were beginning to form. Few people could predict how much Britain would transform during the 19th century. The Regency era stood at a fascinating crossroads between tradition and change. Perhaps that is what makes this period so compelling. It was a world where old customs still dominated daily life. Yet the future was quietly approaching. The people of Regency England lived through this transition without fully understanding its significance. They worried about work, family, health, and reputation, just as generations before them had done. In many ways, they were ordinary people, but they happened to live during an extraordinary moment in history, one that would help shape the modern world that eventually followed. The homes people lived in also reveal a great deal about the realities of Regency England. While grand estates and elegant townhouses often appear in paintings and novels, most people lived far more modestly. Many homes were small, crowded, and lacked comforts that modern families take for granted. Heating depended on fireplaces. Water often had to be carried by hand, and keeping a house clean required constant effort. Every life revolved around practical tasks necessary for survival rather than convenience. Children grew up quickly in this environment. From a young age, they were expected to contribute to family life in meaningful ways, whether helping with household duties, assisting in family businesses, working on farms, or entering employment. Many children carried responsibilities that would seem unusual today. Childhood was often shorter because economic realities demanded that young people become useful as soon as possible. Families viewed this as normal because everyone around them lived in a similar way. Another aspect that modern people might find surprising is how much uncertainty surrounded travel. A journey could be delayed by weather, road conditions, broken equipment, or unexpected dangers. Travellers often prepared carefully because help was not always nearby. Even relatively short trips required planning and patience. The ability to move quickly across large distances, something many people enjoy today, simply did not exist. Status symbols carried enormous importance throughout society. Fine clothing, well-furnished homes, elegant carrigan fashion accessories communicated wealth and position. People often judged one another based on these visible signs. Some cases, individuals spent money they could barely afford simply to maintain appearances. The pressure to seem respectable influenced decisions throughout every level of society. Yet despite these social pressures, many people found meaning in ordinary routines. Families gathered for meals, Communities celebrated local traditions, and friendships provided support during difficult times. People laughed, told stories, shared experiences, and looked forward to special occasions. These simple moments brought comfort in a world where life could often be uncertain. As we continue looking beneath the surface of Regency England, a clear picture begins to emerge. It was a society built on tradition, hierarchy, and hard work. People accepted conditions that might shock modern observers, because those conditions had become part of everyday life. They adapted to challenges that seemed difficult from our perspective, and found ways to create stability within an unpredictable world. The Regency era was not merely an age of elegant ballrooms and aristocratic luxury. It was a complex human story filled with struggle, resilience, ambition, and change, making it one of the most fascinating periods in British history. Perhaps one of the most fascinating things about Regency England is how people balanced hope with uncertainty. Life could be difficult, but most individuals still believed that persistence, good fortune, and strong family connections could improve their circumstances. Young people dreamed of successful careers, advantageous marriages, or opportunities that might lift them into a better social position. Even in a society with rigid class divisions, ambition never completely disappeared. People constantly searched for ways to build more secure futures for themselves and their children. The importance of community celebrations also reveals another side of Regency life. Holidays, fairs, local festivals, and public gatherings provided welcome breaks from daily responsibilities. These events allowed people from different backgrounds to come together, exchange stories, enjoy entertainment, and strengthen social bonds. In a world without modern forms of mass entertainment, such occasions held special significance. They brought excitement and variety to lives that were often shaped by repetitive routines and hard work. At the same time, fear remained a regular companion for many families. Fear of illness, poverty, unemployment, crop failure, accidents, or social disgrace influenced countless decisions. Modern societies possess systems designed to reduce some of these risks, but Regency families often face them directly. This uncertainty encouraged caution and made stability highly valued. People appreciated secure employment, reliable friendships, and strong family relationships because they understood how quickly circumstances could change. Knowledge and opportunity were unevenly distributed throughout society. Wealthy families often had access to books, tutors, and influential connections. Poorer families relied more heavily on practical experience and local knowledge. As a result, to people living in the same country could experience remarkably different worlds. One might spend evenings discussing literature and politics in elegant drawing rooms, while another focused entirely on earning enough money to support a household. These differences shaped how individuals understood society and their place within it. Looking closely at Regency England reminds us that history is rarely defined only by kings, politicians, or famous events. The true story lies in the everyday experiences of ordinary people. It exists in the servant rising before dawn to prepare a household, the farmer worrying about the weather, the mother caring for children, the worker hoping to keep a job, and the young person dreaming of a better future. These countless lives formed the foundation of society. The more we explore this period, the clearer it becomes that Regency England was a world of contrasts. It combined elegance with hardship, tradition with change, privilege with struggle. Those contradictions make the era endlessly fascinating because they reveal a society that was both familiar and profoundly different from our own, or society whose people navigated challenges that continue to teach us about resilience, adaptation, and the complexity of human life. Another important part of Regency England was the way people viewed the future. Unlike today, where rapid technological change is expected, many individuals believed the world around them would remain largely the same. Throughout their lives, traditions that had existed for generations seemed permanent. Social classes appeared fixed. Family roles were clearly defined, and customs governed nearly every aspect of society. Most people could not imagine how dramatically Britain would change during the decades that followed. The countryside especially seemed timeless. Villages often looked much as they had for many years, with churches, farms, and local markets serving as the centre of community life. Generations of the same family sometimes lived in the same area, creating deep connections to the land and local traditions. News from distant places felt far away compared to the immediate concerns of work, weather, and family responsibilities. Yet, beneath this appearance of stability, change was already beginning. New industries were growing, trade was expanding, and ideas about society were slowly evolving. Some people welcomed these developments, believing they would create greater prosperity. Others worried that change might threaten familiar ways of life. This tension between old traditions and new possibilities became one of the defining features of the period. Daily life continued to demand resilience. Most people worked hard simply to maintain their households. Success often depended on discipline, patience, and a willingness to endure difficulties. Comfort was appreciated because it was never guaranteed. Security was valued because it could disappear unexpectedly. These realities shaped the character of the people who lived through the Regency era. Perhaps that is why the period remains so fascinating today. It existed at a unique moment between the old world and the modern age. Many customs still belong to the past, while the first signs of the future were beginning to emerge. The people living through this transition rarely understood its historical significance. They were simply trying to build meaningful lives within the circumstances they had inherited. When we look beyond the elegant clothing, grand houses, and romantic stories, we find something even more interesting. A society filled with ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges. Their experiences remind us that history is not only about famous events, it is also about the millions of individuals who lived, worked, hoped, and struggled every day. Through their stories, Regency England becomes more than a distant period of time. It becomes a window into the enduring human experience itself. The longer we study Regency England, the easier it becomes to understand why many customs survived for so long. Most people were focused on immediate concerns rather than changing society. They worried about earning enough money, feeding their families, maintaining their homes, and protecting their reputations. Large social reforms often seemed less important than the practical challenges of everyday life. As a result, traditions continued from one generation to the next, even when they created hardships or inequalities. Another interesting aspect of the period was the strong connection between respectability and success. Employers preferred workers with good reputations. Families sought marriage partners from respectable households. Business relationships depended heavily on trust and social standing. Because reputation influenced so many opportunities, people invested enormous effort into maintaining it, or single scandalization or public embarrassment could damage a person's future in ways that might be difficult to repair. The pace of information also shaped how society functioned. Without instant communication, local communities developed their own identities and customs. News travelled slowly enough that different regions sometimes felt almost like separate worlds. People relied heavily on personal relationships to learn about opportunities, dangers, and important events. Trustworthy information became a valuable resource, especially during periods of uncertainty. Regency England was also a society that placed great value on endurance. People were expected to tolerate discomfort, overcome setbacks, and continue fulfilling their responsibilities regardless of circumstances. Whether facing illness, financial hardship, difficult weather, or personal loss, individuals often had little choice but to persevere. This expectation created a culture where resilience was admired and self-discipline was considered an important time. Many people found comfort in familiar routines, daily habits, religious traditions, family gatherings, and community events provided stability in a world that could otherwise feel unpredictable. These routines connected people to one another and helped them make sense of their lives, even when conditions were difficult. The presence of tradition offered reassurance. Looking back now, Regency England appears as a fascinating mixture of elegance and struggle. Grand estates and fashionable society existed alongside poverty and hardship. New ideas began emerging while old traditions remained powerful. It was a world filled with contradictions. And perhaps that is why it continues to capture our attention centuries later. The people of the era lived through challenges that seem distant from our own. Yet their hopes, fears, ambitions, and relationships remain surprisingly familiar. In Set V, the story of Regency England is not only about the past, it is also about the timeless nature of human life itself. As Regency England continued to evolve, people often found themselves caught between tradition and necessity. Customs that had existed for generations provided structure and familiarity, yet changing economic conditions sometimes forced individuals to adapt in unexpected ways. Families moved in search of work. Businesses adjusted to new opportunities, and communities slowly responded to broader changes occurring throughout Britain. These transformations rarely happened overnight. Instead, they unfolded gradually, often unnoticed by the people experiencing them. The importance of social connections remained one of the defining features of the era. Knowing the right people could influence nearly every aspect of life. Recommendations helped individuals find employment, secure business opportunities, and improve their social standing. Friendships, family ties, and professional relationships often determined success as much as talent or hard work. In cases, a strong network of connections provided protection against the uncertainties that were so common during the period. At the same time, many people lived with expectations that would seem restrictive today. Society encouraged individuals to follow established paths and fulfill specific roles. Those who challenged accepted norms sometimes faced criticism or isolation. Yet history shows that even within these limitations, people found ways to express creativity, pursue ambitions, and shape their own destinies. Human determination remained as powerful then as it is now. Daily life was filled with small challenges that modern technology has largely eliminated. Lighting a room, heating a home, preparing food, washing clothes, or travelling even short distances required time and effort. These tasks consumed a significant portion of each day, leaving less time for leisure than many people enjoy today. As a result, moments of relaxation often carried special meaning. A conversation with friends, a family gathering, or a local celebration could provide welcome relief from routine responsibilities. Perhaps the most striking lesson from Regency England is how adaptable people can be. Individuals accepted conditions that modern observers might consider difficult, because those conditions formed the reality of their world. They built communities, raised families, developed traditions, and found happiness despite limitations that would seem challenging to us. Their ability to endure uncertainty while maintaining hope is one of the most remarkable aspects of the period. The further we explore this era, the clearer it becomes that Regency England was far more than the elegant image preserved in paintings and novels. It was a complex society shaped by hard work, social expectations, economic pressures, and human resilience. Beneath every grand house and fashionable gathering were ordinary people, navigating the realities of everyday life, creating a story that remains fascinating precisely because it reveals both the strengths and struggles of the human experience. And so, as our journey through Regency England comes to an end, we are left with a picture far more complex than the one often presented in novels and films. Behind the elegant dancers, grand estates, fashionable clothing, and refined manners stood a society filled with challenges that modern people would find difficult to imagine. Public executions attracted crowds. Medical treatments could be terrifying. Social class determined opportunities. And daily life required constant effort simply to maintain comfort and security. Yet the people of Regency England did not see themselves as living in a strange or shocking world. To them, these customs were normal. They woke each morning focused on the same things that concern people. Today, caring for family, earning a living, protecting their future, and finding moments of happiness wherever they could. Their world was different, but their hopes and fears were remarkably familiar. History reminds us that every generation accepts certain ideas as normal. The customs of Regency England may seem disturbing to us now, just as some parts of our modern world may appear equally strange to future generations. What feels ordinary today can eventually become a subject of curiosity centuries later. That is one of the reasons history remains so fascinating. It allows us to step outside our own time and See how people adapted too. Realities very different from our own. The Regency era was an age of contrasts. It was a world of beauty and hardship, privilege and poverty, tradition and change. It produced elegant culture and memorable literature while also exposing deep inequalities and difficult living conditions. Understanding both sides of this story helps us appreciate the period not as a fantasy, but as a real chapter of human history lived by millions of ordinary people. As the candles burn low and the sounds of Regency England slowly fade into the distance, we leave behind its crowded streets, grand ballrooms, quiet villages, and hard-working families. Their world is gone, but their stories remain. And perhaps that is the greatest gift history offers. You has the chance to listen to voices from another age and discover that, despite all the differences, they were not so different from us after all. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the disturbing things that were completely normal in Regency England. Now, settle back, relax, and let the past drift gently into the night. Good night, and sleep well.